Hi there and welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth. My name's Anah. The comments that you see here are my views, beliefs, opinions, and sometimes they are not even my fully formed views, beliefs, and opinions. However, they are my understandings. Please do retain an open mind and reflect on any of the content and your comfort levels. If your views differ, please feel free to leave a comment. Also remember, it is possible to disagree in respectful ways. My way is not necessarily your way and vice versa. You might also find that some of the content on this playlist in regard to spiritual or universal laws, it resonates with you, meaning it feels right to you, while other laws may not feel right or they may not feel comfortable. If this is the case, the information is either not right for you or it is not right for you right now, and it might never be right for you at any given time. It really doesn't matter. As an earthy and practical person, I can put my hand up with all honesty and say that I have at different times had the same feelings about some of the content in here, and with some of them I still have a level of skepticism within my viewpoints, but I choose to retain an open mind about the things that I don't fully understand for a few reasons. Firstly, because I believe it would be supreme arrogance to think that we all know all of the answers while we have a body. And because what is right for one of us is not necessarily right or suitable for all of us, and I choose to respect the differences. Please do leave your opinions, beliefs. Feel free to argue the points in a respectful way with any of the content on the slides and even my interpretations. And if you feel that you can add clarity around some of the content, we would all love to see it. Thank you. For now, though, let's explore the laws.
All creation is governed by law. The principles that operate in the outer universe, discoverable by scientists, are called natural laws. But there are subtler laws that rule the hidden spiritual planes and the inner realm of consciousness. Contained within these laws, or conditions, is the true nature of matter. Knowledge of these laws has an effect upon the mental urges. Mind is the builder. Stay in full mindfulness of the application of universal law as related to self and to others, and know that in love all life is given, in love all things move. In giving one attains, in giving one acquires. In giving, love becomes the fulfillment of desire, guided and directed in the ways that bring the more perfect knowledge of self as related to the universal, all-powerful, all-guiding, all divine influence in life. Love is life. When we go back, merge with the God source, in some infinitesimal but profound way, we expand the mind of God. Our higher self always points the best and most perfect way, and it is ours to listen and choose or reject what we hear. It does not blame, but patiently tries again to show the perfect way, the loving way. All of creation pushes forth. We are ever becoming. Identity ever remains. Universal Law number 33. The law of goodwill. Knowledge of this law will help those who have feelings of futility when thinking about the course of world events. By viewing life in terms of energy, we understand that our higher self, coupled with the action of our thought and mind in the energy of our actions, solidifies this thought into matter or results. In an energy relationship, there is always a positive, creating side and a negative, receiving side of that creative relation. This is simply how the world works. The will to good is the positive, creative impetus, which, when received, makes the manifestation of goodwill possible. We are either mentally polarized or emotionally polarized, and only those who are mentally polarized can begin to appropriate this energy through will on the mental plane. When this is fully comprehended, we begin to realize why the manifestation of goodwill is not more widespread. Jewel states that it is absolutely essential that the will to good be enfolded by the disciples of the world, so that goodwill can be expressed by the rank and file of mankind. The will to good of the world knowers is the magnetic seed of the future. From rays and the initiations, p. 110. Our mental capacity today readily contacts those ideas which constitute the purpose behind the form. We have the ability to mentally construct a happening and see it through to completion. This is will to good. The desire of one to create a loving scenario is goodwill, another but related action. The will to good is always an education process where the recipients are left free to receive the idea or not. The responsibility for expanding the amount of goodwill in the world directly lays on the shoulders of the intelligentsia of a world. In the goodwill process, it is the creative/idea/problem-solving individuals who are directly responsible for creating goodwill. The rank and file of humanity simply do not yet possess the mental capability to evoke the process yet, even though many are able to participate in the process. This knowledge should fill the responsible group with a greater amount of hope and assurance, because they have the power to generate goodwill in their everyday routine solving of problems. Jewel calls says in Esoteric Healing, page 545, when the majority of the inhabitants of the earth are being rapidly oriented towards good, towards righteousness, as the Bible expresses it, and when the bulk of human beings are inclined towards goodwill, then ill health will persistently, even if only gradually, disappear and die out and finally become non-existent. Slowly, very slowly, this is already happening.
So in regard to the law of goodwill and how I've loaded it here today, I want to actually firstly outline that when I look at this within its original format, which is what I've loaded it with, I realise that knowing myself and bearing in mind I created these documents many years ago, that I will have had a reference point. Now, I've said this before, I will have had a reference point that I've chosen to reflect on and channel. Now, I think sometimes when it comes to channeling, and this discussion point, if you like, is going to talk about channeling. Sometimes when our guides are trying to communicate with us, if stuff is outside of our capacity to understand, we're not going to, and I'm talking about me here as well, not really going to be able to receive this information necessarily well, and certainly not be able to unpack it or process it properly, because the guides communicate certainly with me through symbolism, although I have said in the past that I did try auto writing. Now, I would imagine when I look at this within the original context that you've just seen loaded, that it just looks bigger than Ben-Hur, and I didn't have the capacity to unpack that properly back then, and this is why I've left it in its form. But now that 20 years have gone by and I revisit this law, I sort of think, oh, there's a few issues with this from what I perceive, and I actually now know exactly where these laws have come from, because in the past I didn't know. It was just a document that I'd found, and it was like, I don't know who the original author is of these documents, but based on this law and the way it's delivered, because I've kept it obviously in its original format of what I've received, I can now unpack this 20 years later and realise that actually I have a few questions and doubts around the way this information has been channeled in the first instance. Originally, when I was revisiting this law for the purposes of this video, I thought, okay, it's based on Thoth or Hermes teachings, but then I hadn't done the research on it properly, so I took a bit of time out and I've researched some of this content, and I now actually believe it comes directly from Helen Blavatsky in the first instance, and I'm going to put what I believe is the original passage that relates to this law, and I'm going to demonstrate through this process why I believe that the original message has become distorted. So yeah, it was a little bit like, what? When I first saw it, and I'm sure you were like, what? As well. So just to clarify here, I'm going to apologise in advance. This is going to be a much longer one of the laws than I'm used to putting up, but my issues within the context of this are references to Joel Cool. I can't pronounce his name, I'm sorry, but I'm going to refer to him going forward as DK. Anyway, the law states when we look at that previous page, it says he stated X, Y, and Z, right? And then there's references to page numbers without the names of the books, of course. So I was able to go and do some Googling to actually figure all of this out, because, of course, 20 years have gone by and I've got a bit more of an understanding now. So I Googled Ascended Masters, Light Brotherhood, so forth. These groups were developed in the US, or launched in the US in about the 1900s. Well, definitely in the 1900s. Now, I'm going to shock a few people here, no doubt, and no disrespect is intended, but it makes sense to me now why I personally have never been drawn to anything to do with Alice Bailey per se, with her teachings. I felt when I read these passages, as I say, the laws, that they reeked of limitation and even judgment in places. And that's not to say that within the whole lot of that passage there isn't some good wisdom. I'll speak to that at the end of the video here. But what I mean is, my understanding is that the divine does not make judgments or negative critiques about people, such as what we read in there, where this ascended master allegedly turns around and says, well, they aren't clever enough to understand. That kind of puts the hackles up with me, the hairs stand on end, because my understanding is that this is an example of a human limitation being applied to infinite and unlimited divine energy. And I do not, I struggle to believe that any being of really high vibrational light is actually going to cast these kind of aspersions upon humanity. So I felt that I needed to go off and take a little bit more of a look at Alice Bailey, and to revisit my understanding and knowledge of the Ascended Masters, because it's been a while since I've looked at them. And I can see in the first instance that there was either some manipulation or distortion done by either Alice or the publishers, and being fair, I would say probably the publishers, as I saw that they were promoting her books as she learned her knowledge from a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, and they didn't name this teacher in the promotional literature. Now, to be very clear here, we all know that Alice never ever went to Tibet, and that her teacher, of course, DK, had died decades earlier, and she was claimed to communicate with him, who was a Tibetan teacher that was giving her the information that she put into her books, okay? So to give you a bit of a background here about Alice and how this all fits together, because this is actually putting together a jigsaw here, I want to actually give her credit in the first instance, because not everything is bad. She's the person that apparently coined the term New Age, okay? So when we talk about New Age stuff, this was down to Alice. So you can see how old age it is now. Alice Bailey was born in Manchester, and she immigrated to the US in 1907, I think. In England, she had been a member of the Blavatsky Theosophical Society. However, there's more information that's recorded here. So she must have gone to the US and then come back to England or something. But anyway, Alice's claim to fame is that apparently in 1895, she was visited by a spirit wearing a turban. So Alice joined the Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky in 1917, over 20 years after the death of Blavatsky, right? Alice is reported to be, I've told you that bit, the person that coined the phrase New Age movement. I'll just go on to the next slide to give you a bit more information. So hang in there, folks. I'm trying to do this a bit chronological for you, and also trying to make this really brief. So I recommend that if this kind of stuff interests you, you do your own research, because there's plenty out there and it's not all positive, okay? But we'll gloss over that in a moment. Okay, so Alice claims when she's writing prolific amounts of books that she's channeling this DK, right? Who is a higher being, higher vibration, ascended master, all of this stuff, right? Now, what I find interesting is that she will have heard of DK through Blavatsky's writings, because Blavatsky was a prolific author as well. And the difference is that Blavatsky wasn't just sitting on a chair somewhere in Europe and suddenly connected with a Tibetan monk, as far as I know. She actually spent time in the Tibetan monasteries, and my understanding, and I'm open to correction, was that Blavatsky actually connected with DK when he was alive, and he was a mentor and teacher of her. And in my experience as a spirit communicator, it is actually not unusual for somebody to have a connection with a person in life, and when they pass over, that connection remains open. So for Blavatsky, I don't really have an issue with the fact that she's continued to apparently maintain a spiritual connection with DK after he's passed over. Just to be really clear here, by the way, all of these ladies have actually, that I'll be mentioning today, they've all been accused of fraud and other unkind things. But I've got to be clear, in my experience, I actually get this, and so will any spirit communicator, is that we get accused of stuff all the time. So it's just water off a duck's back. And just if we read something that this person is a fraud, we don't necessarily jump to that conclusion. We might take a little bit more of a look at it. Okay. So background here about Blavatsky, just to bring you up to speed about who she was and what she was. As I said, she was a very interesting and controversial character. She was born in Ukraine and she was referred to as a mystic. Now, allegedly, I say allegedly because at this point in time, as far as I know, there is no evidence to support these claims. And this is one of the things that she was accused of fraud for when she was alive. But I've got to say, this woman absolutely poked the bear of the establishment because, of course, back in those days, certainly England and the US was very puritanical Christian, and her arriving as she did would have absolutely rocked them all to the absolute core. Anyway, she's believed to have been born to a Russian aristocratic family, and when she found Buddhism, initially it was when she was about 6 years old, allegedly, through the family that she was born into. They relocated to a town, and I can't remember the name of the Buddhist group, but these people were Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. Then when she was about 17, she was married off to a man who was about, arranged marriage, by the way, a man that was about 33 years her senior. Now, what we know of her has largely been provided by her, and this is where I think that she's open to allegations or claims of being a fraud, is because she states that the reason that there's not a lot of information about her is because she actually made the decision to run away, which would have been taboo in these days, to run away from her elderly husband, who would have been in his 40s at the time. He managed to retrieve her, though, and then he decided to dispatch her back to her family. But as she was travelling back to her family, she ran away and escaped again, and I believe that was in about 1849. She's apparently claimed that her parents were Peter Hahn von Rottenstern, a member of the Polish aristocracy, and her mother was, and the pronunciations once again, I apologize, Yelena Andreevna Hahn von Rottenstern ne Fedayeva. I'm not sure about this, okay? So depending on what you believe, apparently when she's taken off from the husband, she's then gone and lived in a Tibetan monastery. This is where she's got her founding, I believe. And from there, I don't know how many years she actually spent in the monastery, but I do know, I've heard it from a Buddhist, that they have referred to her as an enlightened one and associated with the colour of blue. And unless anybody can tell me different, I'll continue to believe this part of the story. But anyway, she is supposedly have travelled all around the world as part of building her spiritual repertoire, if you like. She obviously had a cultural interest in people. And she also connected with another guide, I believe, called Kutumi, an Indian guy. So she apparently spent time in India as well. And by the time she arrived in London, this makes sense to me, actually, because of my own understanding of spiritual growth, that she's probably done so much work on her own energy fields that the spiritual communication aspects have kicked in. So when she ended up in London, she started doing things like seances, and this is where the first allegations of hoax and fraud came in. Anyway, what else about her? That's probably it for now, because now I'm going to go on to the next part of this, what I consider to be fascinating journey. So what we're talking about is the process of Blavatsky and how she's acknowledged to be the mother of the New Age movement here in the Western world, okay? So before we go on to that, though, because obviously Alice Bailey gets credit in certain areas as well, before we go into this, we need to look at the fact that Annie Besant, I think that's how you pronounce her name, she became involved with the Theosophical Society because she actually met Helena Blavatsky, and presumably they became friends. And when Blavatsky died, Annie took over being the head of the foundation. Now, she was a fascinating person. C.W. Ledbetter, who's also renowned, he also experienced allegations of fraud. He was prominent in it as well. Now, just a bit of background about Annie. She was a beast as far as a force for good. I had a look at her numerology, and she's a 22-4, so she's a visionary, and we'll be talking about the implications of that later. But she was very much a human rights activist, and she got involved in a lot of political movements. She lived in India. She was very passionate about India as well, which was something that Blavatsky was in. But when we talk about, when I say that Annie was a beast, I meant that in a nice way. This woman, she fought for women's rights. She was involved in the match girl workers movements. She tried to improve their working standards. She later then fought for the rights of women to be able to access contraception. I mean, of course, you're talking about, if you look at the lifespan here, the years, the difficulties that women would have had to live through in those days. But I think what actually really stands out is with the human activism, she also apparently took a political stance and fought for the rights of the people of India and the people of Ireland to be able to self-rule or self-govern. So I think it would be fair to say that Annie was a real walker, not a talker. Obviously, she was a deep thinker. She could rationalise, but I would imagine she and Blav got along because they had this shared humanitarian thing as well. Both of them had come from unhealthy, unsuccessful marriages. Annie had been married to a reverend. Long story there, go and do your own research on that. Whereas Alice actually was a little bit more privileged. Alice married twice, but I think there was no divorce involved in that. But anyway, they clashed. Annie and Alice clashed in a really big way on some core issues. And where Alice joined the foundation, I think she joined the Theosophical Society in about 1917. She was apparently ejected from the foundation about 2 years after joining. So I have a couple of thoughts about why these two fought as they did. Alice apparently didn't have anything nice to say about Annie and the Theosophists. She actually referred to them as being low vibration, and in her opinion they were deviating from the teachings of Blavatsky. Now, I can understand Annie Besant turning around and thinking to herself, well, how would you know? You never even met her. And we know better what Blavatsky would have liked, because actually Ledbetter and Besant actually were personal friends of Blavatsky. And I think also the point being that Alice was a mind person. She was analytical, a thinker, and a talker. That's not necessarily bad attributes, but Annie was obviously more of a walker than a talker, And I would imagine that Annie actually probably did not approve of seeing Alice come in a few decades after her friend has died and then claimed to be working with the same Tibetan master. And she may have actually felt the same as I do when looking at some of this content, that I'm not convinced that Alice was actually a pure channel because of these judgmental things that are coming through in the writings. But that's just my impression, and I respect your right to feel differently if you are an Alice Bailey supporter. So, trying to be brief, and before skipping on to the next slide, I just want to acknowledge Annie Besant continued to remain as head of the Theosophical Foundation until her death. And in the early 1900s, she was introduced to an Indian boy that she raised herself. She became the guardian, her and Ledbetter. And this young boy is Krishnamurti. Now, he was supposed to be the leader of the Theosophical Foundation upon her death, but he chose a different path. We'll talk about him in a moment. I just want to flick back to Alice for a moment and say that there was another issue that was made about her, and I can actually see why, because I'm going through the laws at the moment. She was actually accused of racism and I think anti-Semitism as well. But I've got to say, in her defence, when I read the laws, I don't believe that was her intention when she was writing them, but I can actually see what some people might take offence at them. So we'll fix those too. Now, we are getting to the end of this, so I'll keep trying to be quick. Obviously, as a person who considers herself spiritual, who does spirit communication, I don't have an issue or problem with the thought of somebody channeling books and getting it from a higher vibrational being. What I do take a little issue with is that in her books, or Alice's books I'm talking about, one that I don't think she credits Blavatsky as being the primary channeler of DK. And also, I don't believe if I was at university, from a logical, rational perspective, if I was going to submit a paper, that my lecturers would accept me turning around and saying to them, well, I know this because I've got a voice in my head and there's this person that told me it's true and therefore it's true. I mean, they'd probably lock me up in a psychiatric ward or something. And as I stated before, the other problem that I've got with some of the content, specifically in this law of goodwill, is that I'm not convinced it actually demonstrates goodwill when it's judgmental, negative and critical about other people, combined with that air of superiority that comes across like, well, I can do it, but the average person wouldn't be able to. That actually goes against my core ethos and my own personal values, which is, my understanding is that divine energy, the capacity to communicate with spirit, with creator, to build these alignments, if you like, and to raise our vibration, is something that every single one of us walking the planet can do. However, we're all at varying rates of readiness and desire to actually raise that vibration. So no, I don't believe any one of us are special because we can actually do X or Y. It just means we all grow at different rates. None of us that have got a body is more superior than the other. Now, this is where I actually like what Krishnamurti had to say. So just a reminder, I didn't touch on this, but Ledbetter is the one that actually, I should have done a slide for him as well, but Ledbetter is the one that found Krishnamurti and his brother when they were very young. They were waifs, flea infested and all the rest of it. Their father was struggling to bring them up. So the father agreed that Ledbetter would go and raise these two boys in, if you like, cahoots with Annie Besant, but Annie ended up becoming the primary guardian for them, and the documentation that I saw is that Krishnamurti actually had a great love and respect for Annie up until she passed away, so they had a healthy relationship. But apparently, despite the fact that Ledbetter and Besant thought that he was going to be the next theosophical leader, he stood up at age 29 and he refused to. He said it was nothing, he didn't believe in it as far as this goes, all right? So I actually love this, and this is what we're actually doing with me providing all this content to you on spiritual law. He says, I have always said, don't follow anybody, including me. Let us talk things over together rather than accept what another person says blindly or rationally and follow it. After all, we have had gurus, saviours, teachers and leaders all over the world, and we are where we are after all these centuries. So what is important is to understand yourself, not to try and understand somebody who tells you what you are. Now, I find this statement resonates with me completely. And I will say, I did many years ago look at the Theosophical Society, and I did think about joining it, but then I decided it wasn't for me. And this is the same thing with a lot of this content with Alice. Each to their own. It's whatever blows your hair back, but this is what I resonate with. But I've got to say that even Krishnamurti, he had his knockers, if you like, with people calling him out for being a hypocrite. He's a man, you know what I mean? He's a human, he's got a body. That's life, I guess. But anyway, moving along. So bearing in mind everything that I've just talked about, that may actually be a form of me justifying to you why I'm making this decision for me. I mean, you guys do whatever the heck you want, that's your choice. With Krishnamurti, you've got to do what feels right for you. But for me, I'm going to make it a lot easier if that's what you want, and reduce it down to what I believe is the essence of the law that is relevant to all of us, okay? And taking away all of the additions, because I have a feeling if I went through Blavatsky's books that this would be the passage that I found, or that I would find, and that Alice Bailey has expanded on that, as a lot of people do. I'm not disrespecting her for that, but I believe this is the original passage, okay? And I interpret this as saying the law of goodwill is there to help those of us that might struggle. This is such an important law with worldwide events, which seem to be a recurring theme of fear-based disasters every decade, I might add, that when we emotionally detach from what we're seeing and we recognise, now this is important too, because when we talk about the news sensationalising and that, it draws us in emotionally, and we all become all caught up about what's happening for people and how awful it is. But when we're able to emotionally detach from what we're seeing and recognise at a core knowledge that what we think, our mind, right, they're an action in themselves. What we think will translate into a physical result. Okay, so what this law is saying is there's always going to be a positive and negative, right? And creativity is about how the world works. Now, I'm just trying to think how to translate this with sensitivity. When we live from a space of fear and I'm going to go the whole Gaza stuff because that's so divisive, all right? I'm going to use that as an example. Okay, we look at that stuff, it's just so abhorrent, it's distressing. Whichever side of the fence that you look at or sit upon, you look at it and you just think it's so inhumane and it's cruel and it's sad and it makes you want to cry. You've got women and children and innocent people being killed on both sides. And we can allow, this is the point of this goodwill law, we can allow our thoughts to be consumed by these horrors and suffering, right? But when we are focusing on those aspects, because thought is energy, this is what we continue to feed. You know what I mean? Like we're feeding the negativity by focusing on it. Instead, it's that matter of going, okay, this is happening, it's real and it's not nice, and what can I do about it, okay? So what I can do about it is actually start by seeing and visualizing positive outcomes, okay? And that might mean peaceful protests, that might mean you know what I mean? Whatever. But it's rather than feed the negative fear-based reactions, it's direct those thoughts onto and visualizing positive outcomes of peace for all parties for the highest good of all. Okay, this is what this law is talking about. Basically manifesting the positive, because thought creates that butterfly effect. Thought is an action in itself. The moment you have a thought, it's out there and it's transmitting, and then it manifests. So be mindful of our thoughts so that what we're actually energizing and actualizing is the desired outcome and not a compounding of the undesirable outcomes. So I think that's about all I can add to this today. I think I've gone as far as I can with it. I hope it's not too long. I hope it's something that resonates with you, that you find interesting. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, take care. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.